Hi, my name is Hunter Sun. This presentation is a story about air pollution and the lasting impacts of the events that occurred in Donora, Pennsylvania in 1948. To begin with, I will state the purpose and objectives of this presentation. Then I will provide context regarding the Donora smog event of 1948. Following this, I will show the disproportionate impacts of air pollution and its ability to persist over time. Finally, I will talk about the regulation of industrial pollution. The purpose of telling this story is to illustrate the disproportionate impact of air pollution and to show how there are long-lasting impacts that accompany environmental disasters such as the Donora smog of 1948. Furthermore, this presentation commemorates the Clean Air Act and its importance in regulating industrial pollution. Erected in Donora, Pennsylvania is a sign that says "Clean Air started here." Along with this sign is a museum that reminds us of the infamous Donora smog of 1948. For a town that only has a total area of 2 square miles, the impact of this town's history on the US is massive. In 1948, a thick yellow blanket of smog had formed in late October. This smog lasted for a week, leaving 20 dead and many others sick. In a preliminary report conducted by the United States Public Health Services, the incidence of people affected by the smog in Donora was surprising to see. Despite only 2 square miles, in total, 5,910 residents of Donora felt affected by the week-long smog event. Specifically, 2,148, which is 15.5% of the Donora population, felt mildly affected, while another 16.8% felt moderately affected, and 10.4% feeling severely affected. Further looking into the distribution of individuals affected by the Donora smog, we see that there is a general increase in the number of people affected by the smog as age increases. Furthermore, we see that at younger ages, the proportion of affected people that are severely affected is low. However, this proportion increases as age increases. Almost half of the adults 65 years old and older were severely affected. This is understandable given that it is more likely that older adults have developed various conditions that make them more vulnerable to air pollution. According to hospital records, 32 individuals were hospitalized due to the Donora smog, and more than two-thirds of these 32 individuals were older than 55 years old. We can also look at the distribution of effect by location. As we can see on the map, the black shaded area represents the location of the steel, wire, and zinc plants in Donora. According to the preliminary report, the red dotted areas are residential zones that experience the highest percent of people reporting being affected by the smog. What is interesting is that the residential zones in Webster, which are just outside of Donora, saw a high percentage of people reporting being affected by the smog. However, overall, we see a connection between the incidence of affection by smog and the proximity to the steel, wire, and zinc plants. This suggests that the air pollution from the American Steel and Wire and the Donora Zinc Works factories were primary sources of air pollution. The preliminary report from the U.S. Public Health Services, published in 1949, concluded that the air pollution from these plants, which included hydrogen fluoride, carbon monoxide, nitrogen dioxide, and heavy metals within fine particulate matter, were a primary contributing factor to the smog event. However, what is interesting about the Donora case is that it also required the unique geographical characteristics of Donora and temperature inversion to trap polluted air close to the ground to create such a long-lasting smog. Not only was the smog itself long-lasting, but the pollution released from the plants persisted in the environment for many years even after the plants were closed. This figure shows the changing arsenic, cadmium, zinc, calcium, and lead concentrations in lake sediment near Donora over time. From this figure, we can see that after Donora Zinc Works and steel mills were opened in 1901 and 1915, there was a steady increase in concentration of all chemicals. Between 1950 and 1960, we see a steep decrease in chemical concentration levels due to the closing of the Donora zinc works. However, this is short-lived due to the opening of a new power station. Overall, from this figure, we see that in the Donora area, there's a persisting pollution that is being made. But we also see that there's still a lot of pollution hidden within Donora. Levels for contaminants such as cadmium or lead remain above the recommended levels, and it is worrisome that environmental events and human disturbances could cause these contaminants to be released from the sediment back into the water to affect Donora residents. This is an example of how industrial factories produce long-lasting pollutants that remain threats to public health over long periods of time. Because of this, pollution as a result of industrial processes should be heavily regulated. Given this knowledge of the long-lasting impact of the industries in Donora, it is interesting to look back at the recommendations provided by the U.S. Public Health Services. After their preliminary investigation and report, they concluded that the unique combination of Donora's geographic location and temperature inversion resulted in the smog. As such, it was recommended that a weather monitoring system was established to avoid this situation in the future. Furthermore, they also recommended that the Donora zinc works and steel mills reduce the amount of pollutants they released into the environment by changing their industrial processes. However, these were all just recommendations. No regulations or policies were put in place to limit the pollution that the Donora industries released, nor were these industries held responsible for the pollution they caused and the damage they did to people's health. This unsatisfactory end to the Donora smog event, and for many other reasons, resulted in the push for the Clean Air Act. Essentially, the Clean Air Act formalized our government's responsibility to regulate the emissions of hazardous air pollutants. The Clean Air Act was extremely important because, as we can see from this figure, industry, electricity, and transportation are the three largest contributors to the total greenhouse gas emission in the US in 2019. Without the regulation of these industries, communities and lives would be destroyed by air pollution. Overall, the Donora smog of 1948 shows us that the elderly and people who live close to a pollution source are disproportionately affected by air pollution. Furthermore, this air pollution is persistent in the community even many years later. Through the smog event, as a society, we became aware of the dangers of unregulated industrial pollution. Unregulated industrial pollution is dangerous due to both its immediate and long-lasting impact on health and the environment. As such, the small town of Donora stands at the forefront of the clean air movement, which culminated in the Clean Air Act. While the government has taken responsibility for protecting and improving the air quality in the US, there is still more work to be done. Even today, industry is still a large contributor to air pollution in the US.